Sup, guys? Officially a win streak at this point. More than official. 4 wins in a row. Like to see that. Philadelphia, it was a close one. They were able to get there. Once it got into the bullpens, I thought that they did have the bullpen advantage because of the rest scenario there. Arizona had played a doubleheader the day before that, so it got down to the bullpens. Philly did use more of their bullpen than Arizona did, but it paid off as they were able to win, take the lead, win the game in the final innings there in what was a close, low-scoring game until it got down to the final innings. I'll take it. In Toronto, my strong lean, kind of wish I played that because that was also correct. It got close. So they were winning 7-2, and then they almost blew it and gave up a 4 spot in the 9th inning. This Toronto bullpen, not good, but they were still able to hang on to the win there. Move on to baseball today. We got a full Friday slate, so we got new series starting. You can get some situations out of the Friday slate like this when you have these new series beginnings. You have teams transitioning to new series. You got travel, whatever. Find some spots here. I will just point out, even though I'm not going to be on any of these games, I don't believe, but Texas, Oakland, and Kansas City, I believe, all were off yesterday, and they're all facing teams that played yesterday. So those 3 teams at least have kind of a rest advantage, bullpen rest advantage, although I don't see a strong enough angle to play any of those 3, but just pointing that out. I will say one of the worst spots that I can see here, I would say, is Milwaukee, but I can't quite get there, fading them. Milwaukee's returning home from a road trip, which took them to Washington and the Braves, although it was a somewhat shorter road trip, only 6 games, 2 series, but they just swept the Braves. So I think they could be in a pretty big letdown spot as they're returning home and they're atop the NL Central and they're facing Cincinnati, who's now in last place in the division. Cincinnati might have a little bit more focus in a spot like this. Milwaukee scored a ton of runs in that game against the Braves, too. They scored 34 runs in the 3-game series. They're winning yesterday 16-7. So I see this as a pretty big letdown spot for Milwaukee and a return home spot. And, I say that when teams return home from road trips, especially with no time off, they have to get back to family life. They have to get their home affairs back in order. So that tends to be a little bit of a distraction. Cincinnati is coming off. What did they do yesterday? They beat Miami, and that was actually a closer game than what it looked like. So they are traveling as well up to Milwaukee from Miami, but they're continuing a road trip. They took 3 out of 4 against Miami, but who cares? When it's Miami, you beat Miami. Everybody's supposed to beat Miami pretty much. But the 10-4 win that Cincinnati had yesterday was misleading because that game actually went into extra innings. Cincinnati scored 7 runs in the top of the 10th. So that was a closer game than what the final score makes it look by far. That was a 3-3 game going into extra. So Cincinnati had a bit of a close one there. Miami really wound up running through their bullpen. They used 7 relief pitchers. Cincinnati used 4. The thing that keeps me off of Cincinnati a bit here, though, even though I agree with the Cincinnati side, it does look like the market is on the Cincinnati side here. I just don't know if I can quite do it with this starting pitching matchup here, man. Even though, like I said, Cincinnati they used some of their bullpen, but I think Milwaukee actually used less of their bullpen. So Cincinnati, I think, used 4 relievers, and Milwaukee used 3. So Milwaukee actually kind of saved some of their bullpen. So that's one thing that keeps me off a little bit. Looking at the starting pitching matchup on the surface, you'd think Cincinnati has the starting pitching edge with Carson Spires, who's putting up good numbers this year, 3.59 ERA, 1.16 whip. But I think a bunch of that was in relief appearances. He hasn't been that bad as a starter either, really. He's been pretty consistent in allowing 4 or fewer runs, I think, in every one of his starts, which is pretty decent. But his stats against Milwaukee are not very good, so that's what keeps me off of this. Another thing that keeps me off of Milwaukee, it's a small sample size, but they're 7 for 16 off him. They have a 438 average and 1,062 OPS against Spires. So that gives me a little bit of pause there. Spires, most of that was when he faced them early in this season on April 9th, and he had a 4-inning, I believe, relief appearance and got kind of destroyed, giving up 7 hits, 3 walks, and only striking out 1, 4 runs, 3 earned in that one. That was a bad outing for him. And that was kind of Milwaukee gaining some familiarity with him, and he didn't do well in that one. So I don't know if I trust Spires. I don't trust Savale either, and he's on the other side pitching for Milwaukee. He's been the worst pitcher with the season stats, obviously. He's got a 5.14 ERA, 1.41 whip. Nothing to really like about that. Since he's been on Milwaukee, he hasn't been that much better either, although he's allowed, 5 or fewer earned runs in every start. He allowed 4, 1, 3, 2, and 5, coming off his worst outing against Washington. So maybe that means he'll actually bounce back a little bit. I don't know, but his strikeout walk ratio hasn't been that good either. He's been walking a lot of guys since he's been on Milwaukee. So I don't know. I don't trust either of these guys. So if the stats weren't what they were against these specific lineups, I might actually fire on Cincinnati because I do still agree with Cincinnati. The situational spot, I think, is pretty bad for the Brewers, but I just don't quite like the starting pitching matchup, man. Like I said, and I think Milwaukee actually has a slight bullpen edge, rest edge at least, but Savale also has done well against the Reds. They're only 9 for 42 off him in their careers with a 214 batting average and 607 OPS. So it's not something I quite want to do, but this was close to being a play because that Milwaukee spot, it's one of those types of spots where I like to go against that team. Milwaukee is actually, we see reverse line movement too against a public Milwaukee team. So there are market indicators pretty strongly on the Reds here. Milwaukee has dropped from minus 140 to minus 128, 67% of the tickets on Milwaukee because obviously the public just saw them sweep the Braves. They see that Milwaukee has the way better record, first place team versus last place team. They're going to want to be on Milwaukee here. And Milwaukee does have the better offense, at least, over Cincinnati. So that's one edge that they have, but still 77% of the cash is over on the other side on Cincinnati. So some strong market indicators on the Cincinnati side. It's just, like I said, the bullpen rest edge and the starting pitcher's track record against these specific hitters keep me off of it just slightly, but I do like Cincinnati in that one still. Go to the games I'm actually on. One of the games is going to be fading a team that is returning home from a road trip as well. The other team that's returning home from a 2-series road trip is the Tampa Bay Rays, the Devil Rays. Oh, we got to keep the devil out, though, man. Devil Rays had cooler logos and stuff, though. And I think it's a lot cooler to have the ocean creature that can sting you to death. That's more badass than the rays of the sun. Oh, but those will give you skin cancer, I guess. I don't know. Tampa is returning home from a series, from a road trip with 2 series. It took them to Houston and St. Louis. They split the road trip, I believe, 3-3. Not much to take away from that other than what I just said about Milwaukee, the fact that Tampa is now returning home with no time off. They did get a win yesterday against St. Louis, but the fact that they're returning home from a road trip, again, I find that to be a distracted spot. I think that's a typical situational handicapping tool there to look to go against teams returning home from road trips because they have to get back to home life, family life, and that tends to distract them a little bit in that first game back, even if it is a game against Baltimore, who is atop the division in the AL East, which is a big game for Tampa, but still, I think Baltimore does have some reasons to be focused here, starting a new road series as well. And like I said, I think Tampa has some reasons they still might be a little bit distracted returning home. Maybe not as much of a distraction as Milwaukee's situation. I think the situation is stronger against Milwaukee, but the starting pitching situation in this game is what puts this one on the card for me and over the top for me, even though we are playing a public Baltimore road favorite here. I actually like this one. So Tampa returning home from a road trip. They are an above 500 team, and due to what they did at the trade deadline, trading away some guys, I think there has got to be a little bit of a feeling here in this Tampa locker room, like we're playing for the future at this point. We gave up some of our guys who could help us right now. So I think there is maybe some of that going around with Tampa as well. Maybe giving them a little bit less motivation than they might have if they were a buyer at the trade deadline instead of a seller. But they were a seller, and that's going to factor into this handicap here as well, man. Tampa against St. Louis yesterday, they used 5 relief pitchers because Boz didn't do very well again, didn't go that deep into the game. So Tampa's bullpen is not in good shape coming into this game either, man. They used a bunch of the back end of their bullpen, including their closer, Fairbanks. They used some of their best relievers to get that win over St. Louis yesterday. So that's another drawback for Tampa here, because if you think they have the better bullpen over Baltimore, which maybe they slightly do, I think that's a little bit of a disadvantage there as well. That kind of counters what bullpen advantage they might have. As Baltimore had that game yesterday. Like I said, it was a 7-6 loss, and they wound up splitting the series against the Blue Jays. They lost the series actually 2-1. So that might motivate Baltimore. Actually, they lost the series to the last place team, and now they're tied again with the Yankees. So Baltimore has reason to be focused here, man. They're battling with the Yankees for the top spot in the division. They just lost the series to the lowest team in the division. I think that's going to have them a bit focused here because Tampa Bay is actually ahead of Toronto, and they know they just lost to Toronto. So I think that means they can't afford to take Tampa Bay lightly. So I think Baltimore is going to be focused for a number of reasons here, even though this is going to be a third straight road series for Baltimore. I think the fact that this is the start of a new series, they get out of Toronto, travel. They're traveling about the same amount as Tampa, really, like distance-wise. So I don't think that's that much of a factor. I think Baltimore might come in a little pissed, even though that game was 7-6. That game wasn't as close as the final score made it look. As I told you, Baltimore put up 4 runs in the 9th inning and almost were able to pull it off, but they still lost to the last place team in the division. So I think that's going to piss them off. And Baltimore only used 3 of their relief pitchers yesterday, and they aren't exactly the greatest, as Creamer did terrible in the game yesterday. My handicap was right on that game. Gaussman outpitched Creamer significantly in that game, but Baltimore was able to kind of keep their bullpen intact and only use 3 relief pitchers by spreading them out and not using that many of them and not using them using kind of some of their longer relief men to eat up some of the remaining innings there. So I actually like that aspect of it for Baltimore. Looking at the starting pitching matchup, man, it's the battle of the Zacks. Zach Eflin is pitching for Baltimore, and I like this. I think I probably like him over Zach Littell in general, even though, Littell has the way worse whip. So people might look at this and kind of think, well, they have similar ERAs, so they're maybe similarly skilled pitchers, but I think Eflin is actually the better pitcher, as you can tell based on his whip. His whip is significantly better than Littell's, which may be part of the reason why Baltimore wanted to go after him and target him at the trade deadline. He's a guy that can come into the rotation and actually put up some decent starts, and he actually has been decent for them since they acquired him. He gave up 3 earned runs against Toronto and gave up 2 earned runs against Cleveland, went 12 and a third combined over those 2 games and only allowed 5 earned runs. That's not too bad. And he put up a 10-1 strikeout walk ratio. So that's pretty decent performances out of him, although he allowed 15 hits. So that's not great. 10 of them in the game against Toronto. So his start against Cleveland was better, but he faced 2 good offenses since they acquired him, man. Toronto and Cleveland. There's nothing to really scoff at there, those 2 outings from Eflin. But one of the main reasons why I'm going to be on Eflin here is, as I was just alluding to, Tampa traded him to Baltimore, and now he is facing the team that just traded him. He is facing Tampa for the first time since they let him go, which I think is going to be an extra motivator for Eflin, man. I think it means he's going to be focused. He's on the better team now, so maybe Tampa will be a little bit, I don't know, will they be motivated to face their former guy just because they're a little bit angry that he's on the better team or something? I don't know. I think the motivation lies more with the starting pitcher facing the team that got rid of him, the team that said, hey, we're going to trade you away. We don't really want you anymore. Although I think he understands that it has to do with the market and what's going on with the season. And Tampa, I think, was kind of considering it to be a lost season, but still Eflin now gets to face that team that just got rid of him a couple starts after they just got rid of him. So it's still fresh in his mind too. So I think that's good. So I like that aspect of this. I think that's going to motivate Eflin a little bit more facing his former team. So I like that. As I was mentioning, he's got a 4.05 ERA, which is okay, but a 1.18 whip is pretty good, and his 97-14 strikeout walk ratio is also good. His command has been good. He does not walk a lot of people, even though he doesn't rack up a lot of strikeouts, and he does allow too many hits, 130 and 122 and a third innings pitched. So he's not a huge strikeout guy, but his command is good. He doesn't put a lot of people on via the free pass. He goes on stretch. He went on a stretch in the May and June where he went, I think 6 or 7 starts in a row. He didn't walk anybody. So his command is pretty good. He's just maybe putting too many pitches over the plate to some extent and being a little bit too hittable. But I still think overall, like, those command stats are pretty good, man. His whip is pretty good. Because the walk numbers are so low, he's facing a Tampa offense that is certainly the worst of these 2 offenses. Baltimore certainly has the better offense. Tampa's offense has done okay against them, which does give me a little bit of pause. But I think the motivational aspect of this, I think, helps. And I think Littell's numbers are worse against Baltimore's than Eflin's are against Tampa. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Eflin's numbers aren't the greatest against Tampa, but like I said, he is facing his former team now. 5 of their hitters have seen him before, so not everybody has seen him before because he was their teammate. They're 6 for 21 off him lifetime with a double, a home run, 1 RBI, 4-1 strikeout walk ratio. It's a somewhat high 286 average and 794 OPS. So Eflin's stats are not dominant against these Tampa hitters. Like I said, Tampa, their hitters aren't that great, and I think the extra motivation that you'll get from Eflin could help put him over the top here. Zach Littell, on the other hand, he's got a similar ERA, 4.06, but his whip is a lot higher at 1.33. That's not great, even though his command numbers are actually similar to Eflin's. The Zach's kind of pitch similar. He's got a 108 to 23 strikeout walk ratio, which is also pretty good, but he is way too hittable, allowing 136 hits and 119 and 2/3 innings pitched. So between the two, even though neither Zach is really a huge strikeout artist, and they both have decently low walk numbers, Littell is the more hittable of the two, and he's been kind of struggling as of late. He had a 6 ERA in the month of June and 4.23 in the month of July. Nothing that's really that terrific, although in the month of July, he did face a lot of good offenses, but he faced Baltimore twice in the month of June, so Baltimore has seen him a couple of times recently. Of course, Tampa Bay was not facing Eflin because he was on their team, so there is that recent familiarity with Baltimore against Littell, and Baltimore, I believe, has pretty good numbers in a big sample size against Littell. Yeah. So even though Eflin's numbers aren't that great against Tampa's offense, Baltimore's offense is the better offense, and they have done well against Littell in their careers, and they faced him twice in a row not too long ago this season. Baltimore is 23 for 75 off him with 4 doubles, a triple, 4 home runs, 8 RBIs, 14 to 2 strikeout walk ratio, though. So that's a good strikeout walk ratio, as Littell tends to do. But still, he has allowed a 307 average and 871 OPS to Baltimore. So Baltimore's stats are good against Littell. And in those 2 starts, he actually wasn't that bad earned run-wise. He gave up 6 earned runs over 12 innings, which isn't that bad, but he also gave up 18 hits, which is pretty bad. So again, he was way too hittable. He only walked 2, but he also only struck out 5. So very Littell-esque numbers there, with only a 5-2 strikeout walk ratio and giving up way too many hits and kind of escaping. Baltimore is an offense that you don't want to be putting too many men on base, man. You don't want to be giving too many hits up to Baltimore. So all of that, we got Tampa in the return home situation. We got Tampa having their bullpen more used in yesterday's games, and we have Eflin with extra motivation facing his former team, and he has the better stats against the opposing lineup over what Littell has done in his career against Baltimore, and more familiarity with Baltimore's hitting against Littell. So all of that puts me on the Baltimore side here. Baltimore is public. Like I said, they're a public road favorite, but this line is moving up on Baltimore, man. So I think there might be some public and professional agreement on the Baltimore side in this one. And maybe for some of the reasons I just mentioned, Baltimore's up from -120 to -132. So it's getting a little bit high. They have 90% of the tickets, but 95% of the cash. So I do think there is some legitimate money coming in on the Baltimore side here. You can get them at -130 still on the money line. That's kind of my cutoff as far as playing a money line. You can play it that way, or you could do like a -1 run line where you can probably get it around like a spread price somewhere around -110, or you could split -1.5 run line on Baltimore plus 135 or so. And you could do half the bet on that and half on the -130 money line if you want to try to put a little bit less money into it. But you would need Baltimore to win by multiple runs in that case on the road as a public road favorite. But there are reasons why I think Baltimore can get this done, as I just outlined. And with a game that could potentially be a bit of a higher scoring game, Baltimore with an offense that does have scoring ability, that makes it a little bit easier to stomach laying a run line like that with a team like Baltimore. So that's play 1. Play 2, looks like I'm going against the market a little bit here, although I am playing on an anti-public home slight favorite here, and that's going to be, I'm going to play on Seattle here, man, even though it looks like there is some extra cash on the Mets side. Seattle looks like they're down a little bit from minus 120 to minus 119. 67% of the tickets over on the other side on the Mets and 73% of the cash on the Mets. So the Mets are public. Mets, I mean, they carry a lot of name recognition, but the public likes the Mets. They've been one of the hotter teams in baseball over the last couple months, pretty much. They're in second place in the division now. They've actually pulled ahead of Atlanta in the NL East. So people like what the Mets have been doing. The Mets score, so the public likes that too, whereas Seattle does not have as much of an ability to score. So the Mets have the better offense. We can get that out of the way here. I am fading the team that has the better offense in this one, although I'm playing on the team with the better offense in Baltimore. The Mets have a better offense in Seattle, so that's the one advantage that I see. But I think this starting pitching matchup is a decent mismatch here, man. This is a matchup between a pitcher that I like to fade against a pitcher that I like to play on, and that is factoring into this handicap here. But like I said, the Mets are a bit public, even though it does look like they have more of the money coming in on them right now, and the line moving in their direction slightly. But still, I don't think this is a pitching matchup where you really want to go against the home Seattle team here. I like how this sets up. I think the Mets are in a bad situational spot too, man. They're starting a third straight road trip, so they're a team that is in a situation where they've been kind of all over the place, man. They went out to the West Coast, played Anaheim, lost that series, then they had to play a makeup game on a day that they would have had off. They had to go back to St. Louis into the Central Time Zone and play that game. Then they had, and I mentioned it was a tough spot coming out of that, having to go into elevation into Colorado, and they lost that first game in Colorado after having had to play that makeup game the previous day, bouncing all over the place. Then they won the last two games at Colorado because Colorado's not very good. Now they're having to go out back to the West Coast again to the Mariners. So they're playing basically a third straight road series, but with an additional makeup game in a different location mixed in there too. The Mets have been doing a lot of travel, man, bouncing all over the place and coming out of elevation, out of Colorado and going to the West Coast. I don't think that's a great situation, really. A lot of teams tend to struggle coming out of that high elevation of Colorado and having to play again right away. And that's what's happening with the Mets as they played in Colorado yesterday. They won 9-1 because Colorado sucks. And the Mets did only use 3 of their relief pitchers. So their bullpen is somewhat intact, although I don't think their bullpen is that great. So I don't think Seattle's is either, but Seattle's is actually slightly more well-rested than the Mets is after yesterday's. The Mets had to go to their bullpen a little bit earlier with Peterson getting knocked out. Seattle has a little bit of the travel edge, though. Like I said, the Mets having to travel all over the place and coming out of Colorado. I mean, that's a bit of a bad rest spot, where Seattle, they are not traveling. They just get to play at home. And yes, they won dramatically yesterday, but it was against a bad Detroit team. So I think Seattle, I mean, they have the better record than Detroit. Seattle is probably going to be focused after that, man. They know they almost lost to a bad Detroit team yesterday, and I think they're going to see that as kind of an escape more than like a dramatic walk-off win, even though it was. They were down 3-1 in the ninth inning, and they scored 3 runs, won the game 4-3. Maybe that'll even give them a little bit of momentum, but I think when that happens, man, and the Mariners almost got swept in that series. They played a bad series against a Detroit team that isn't very good, and were finally able to escape and get that final win. I think that's going to actually propel them into this game and finally give them a little bit of positive momentum after they lost 2 games to that bad Detroit team, avoided the sweep. I think that's actually a positive for Seattle rather than a negative. I don't think they're going to consider that to be like a monster win where they're going to be in a letdown mode. I think that's going to be more of a a momentum starter for them. And they realized that they almost got swept at home by a team that they should have beaten, man. A series that Seattle was the favorite. They should not have let that happen. So I think Seattle's going to use that as a little bit of motivation. I think with a big name team like the Mets coming in, I think Seattle may be focused, even though you could argue the Mets will still be a little bit focused on Seattle too. I think the focus goes more the other way on a big market New York team coming into your house. Mets playing a road interleague game, I think means a little bit less to the Mets maybe, especially after coming out of elevation like that. And I think it's a bad spot for them. Seattle got a good start out of Wu last night, and they only used 2 relief pitchers to the Mets having used 3. So neither bullpen is in really a bad spot here. Seattle's maybe in the slightly better spot. And I think, like I said, neither bullpen is really that excellent. So I think that's fine for Seattle. And then we look at the starting pitching matchup, obviously. Jose Quintana is pitching for the Mets, man. He's been pitching a bit better. He had a really good month of July with a 2.05 ERA in the month of July. But prior to that, he wasn't pitching as well, man. He has not been that great this season overall. And he's an older pitcher. He's not a guy that comes in and blows you away with strikeouts. He's just an okay pitcher at best. 3.95 ERA isn't that bad. 1.27 whip, a little bit on the high side. 94 to 44 strikeout walk ratio isn't very good. That walk number is a bit high. 106 strikeouts and 118 in a third innings pitch isn't that bad. It means he's not really that hittable. Seems like he's throwing some junk that's kind of moving off the plate and whatever because he's walking too many guys, but also not being that hittable, but still his strikeout rate is really low. Walk rate is a bit high for my liking, so I don't like any of that, even though he's not allowing that many hits. He's coming off not a very good start in his last outing against Anaheim, and maybe we're seeing him start to regress a little bit after a hot July where he didn't face that many good offenses. He faced the Yankees, and he somehow got out of that game allowing 1 run, but he walked 5 guys in that game, man, so that wasn't good. And then against Anaheim in his most recent start, it wasn't very good. He only went 5 innings. He gave up 3 earned runs. He walked 4 guys, allowed 3 hits. So he put 8 men on base there, earned base runners, had 4 strikeouts, too many walks, man. Not a very good outing, even though he limited the damage a bit, but still against a weak Anaheim offense. That's not very good. And now he's coming in and he's facing a Seattle lineup that I think actually has pretty good numbers off him. Yeah, they do. So Seattle has seen him a decent amount, and they're 18 for 60 off him with a double, 2 home runs, 14 RBIs. It's a lot of RBIs, and 11 to 10 strikeout walk ratio is not good either. So his command hasn't been very good against them. A lot of walks. It's a 300 batting average and 833 OPS for Seattle's offense against Quintana, and Quintana has worse numbers on the road. Looking at the home road splits, which is something I don't do a lot of, but looking at this pitching matchup, man, Quintana this season has been better at home than on the road, which, I mean, I think that goes for a lot of pitchers, but still, he is pitching on the road here. He has good home numbers, and on the road, not as good. 4.58 ERA. His day-night splits, this is a night game, and his night ERA is 4.45, so he's been at his worst in road night games, and that is the case here. Maybe that has to do with the fact that some of them are in like different time zones and stuff like that, so that's not good. And he has allowed a higher opponent batting average in those splits as well, with a 258 batting average on the road, which isn't that bad, but his home opponent batting average is a lot better. He's held opponents to a pretty low opponent batting average, to be honest, and his worst is actually at night with a 265. His best is during the day. So he's at his worst in road and night games, and that is what we're getting here. On the other side, Bryce Miller is pitching, and he's an excellent pitcher, man. Seattle's got their rotation stacked with good young pitchers, man. He's 10 years younger than Quintana. He's putting together another good season, 3.62 ERA, 1.05 whip. His strikeout numbers aren't that high either, but he is not very hittable either. Just kind of like Quintana, but his Miller has better command, though, with a lower walk rate. So that's where he really has the advantage. And he's a little bit less hittable than Quintana, too. And his strikeout numbers are actually higher as well. He's got 113 strikeouts to 30 walks. So that's a better-looking strikeout walk ratio. So Miller fools hitters better. He has a better strikeout rate, a lower walk rate, and a lower hits allowed rate, I think, than Quintana, too, even though that's a little bit closer. 103 hits allowed and 126 and 2/3. So that's not bad either, even though Miller has allowed kind of too many home runs with 16, but I'm not that concerned by that. And he's been good for a while, man. You have to go back to a weird anomaly at Miami it was the second straight road start and third road start in 4 starts at Miami back on June 23rd to find a start where he allowed more than 4 earned runs, and that was a 6 earned run outing, a bad outing against Miami. But since then, he allowed 2, 2, 0, 0, 3, and then 4 earned runs in his last outing. He had a not very good outing against Philadelphia. I think I might have been on the under in that one. I was surprised that it was as bad an outing as it was for Miller, even though he had a 4.1 strikeout walk ratio, which isn't bad, 4 1/3 innings pitched. He threw a lot of pitches, wasn't very efficient with his pitches in that game. And he gave up 4 earned runs and 6 hits, but that was against a hot hitting Philadelphia. I mean, well, not hot because they'd kind of cooled off, but a team that can really hit, though, in Philadelphia in general. Their offense is good. So I think he's going to bounce back, man. Miller, even though he is facing another good offense here in the Mets, Miller is a much better pitcher than Quintana, in my opinion. I think he's in a bounce back spot after having a bad outing against the Phillies. And the Mets really have not seen Miller much, man. They're only 2 for 6 off him. Only 2 of their hitters have ever seen him before. And Bader is the only player in their lineup that even has a hit off of him. Bader and Martinez, the only 2 that have ever faced him. They're 2 for 6 off him lifetime with nothing else, no extra base hits, no walks, 1 strikeout. So it's a 333 batting average and 667 OPS. But Miller, that means there's a lot of unfamiliarity here. So for the majority of the Mets lineup, they're going to be facing Miller for the first time. So I think that gives us an edge with Miller as well, because these hitters have to figure him out. And he's a good young pitcher, man, with good stuff that can fool hitters. And that's an edge to a pitcher. First couple times hitters have to face him. They have to adjust and figure him out. So I think that's good. And his numbers against those 2 hitters aren't really that bad either, except for the batting average. But anyway, like, such a small sample size. I don't think you can take that much away from that. And looking at his home road splits, it is dramatic, man. At home, he has a 2.27 ERA and away a 5.37 ERA. So a huge home road dichotomy. Miller is much better at home, and that's where he is tonight. And he has a 191 opponent batting average at home as opposed to a 254 one on the road, which isn't even that bad. But at home, he's been very, very good. And that includes that bad start that he had the last time out at home. He's been a lot better at home, so he's comfortable at home. It's more of a pitcher-friendly park at home, too, so that has something to do with it. But still, that's where he is tonight. He's been much better at home, and he's been better at night with a 3.42 ERA and 203 opponent batting average, whereas in the day, his ERA is 4 with a 249 opponent batting average. It still isn't even that bad, but Miller is at his best in home night games, and that is what we get tonight as well. So those splits look good for this as well. So I think we have a situational and travel edge and a slight bullpen rest edge, all in favor of Seattle. And I think they have the starting pitching edge here with the better, younger pitcher who has the better matchup against these opposing hitters, a lot more unfamiliarity as well. Whereas Quintana on the other side is familiar to these Seattle hitters and has bad numbers against them. And the splits are in favor of Bryce Miller against Quintana as well. So all of that puts me on Seattle. You can get them at minus, what can you get them at right now? Minus 116. So those 2 plays could just call it 2 money line favorites right now. Baltimore Orioles minus 130, Seattle Mariners minus 116. And quickly, I will mention just NFL preseason continues. I mean, there's not much to really take away from that, but I can tell you that I see a big cash discrepancy in all 3 of these games tonight with the line movement on the team that has the cash discrepancy. So there must be some angles for professionals here where they know that these teams are going to be like, because they're all playing backups in this first preseason game for each of these teams. I think the odds makers kind of are, or not the odds makers, but the bettors are kind of coming in and telling you, hey, this team has like a more deep bench. Like they're going to have like a deeper rotation in these games. Maybe that's why. And the public is actually against all 3 of them. So the ticket percentage is on the Steelers, the Dolphins, and the Ravens tonight, but the cash percentage and the line move is on the other side in every one of those 3. So it looks like there are market indicators on all 3 of the other teams here, on the Texans, the Falcons, and the Eagles tonight. So I'll just point that out really quickly. That's going to do it for me, man. Let's kick off the weekend right. Happy Friday. Peace.